Hello, I'm Carol.
And I'm Vanessa, and today we're standing in front of the log house at the Walker Ranch Homestead near Boulder, Colorado. Now, can you guess how old this house is? I'll give you a hint. It was built between the years 1864 and 1865. That makes it over 150 years old. Do you want to take a closer look? Come on in.
So welcome to the log house. It was originally built by a man named Lou Jane, and it was used as a general store for the people who worked and lived in the area. Now, James Walker, the namesake of the ranch, was born in Virginia in 1848. And as a young man, he found himself ill from what they used to call consumption. He was told that the dry mountain air would be good for his health. So he moved west and settled in this area in 1869 at the age of 21. He met a woman named Phoebe Skinner, who was originally from Ohio and was teaching school in Crisman, Colorado. James and Phoebe got married and had one son named William in 1877. They purchased this property and eventually filed a homestead claim on it in 1882. So James and Phoebe Walker had to turn this from a general store into a home. And we're in the main room. You can see that it's fairly small. It served both as a living room and a kitchen. But you can see that there's no sink like we have in kitchens nowadays, nor is there a refrigerator. There was no running water or electricity, so they would keep items that had to be cooled in a root cellar. And they did have a wood stove, though, that Mrs. Walker would use for cooking, and it also kept the room warm. Now, there's a couple of things that Mr. and Mrs. Walker probably liked about this home. One is it has a wood floor instead of a dirt floor. The other is that it has window panes instead of a simple hole in the window. And you can see some of the waviness in the panes because that's from the original panes that were in this home. Those two features make it more inhabitable, and that's why we call it a log house instead of a log cabin. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Walker didn't live in this home very long because it wasn't as winterproof as they would like. Eventually, they built another home next door that became their permanent residence. But while they were here, where do you think they slept? Well, I mentioned it was originally a one-room general store. So they had to put a partition up to create a back room that served as both a bedroom and an area where they could wash up. Let's go take a look.
Now, welcome to the back room. This is where Mr. and Mrs. Walker likely would have stayed. They probably had a bed somewhere around here. But today we're showing all of the different products and things that they might have used in order to maintain their hygiene during the 1880s. So the first thing you'll probably notice when you walk into this room is the large tub that's right there. And the importance of this is you'll notice that there aren't any taps or ways that water could fill up the tub automatically. What Mr. and Mrs. Walker would have had to do is go to the well, get buckets of water, heat that water up, and then use it in their tub. And you can understand this was a very time-consuming process, which is why generally they only bathed once a week on Saturdays right before church so that they could be clean. And they would bathe in order of age, so Mr. Walker would have bathed first, followed by Phoebe, all the way down until the youngest child, who for them was William. And you can imagine if you had many siblings, by the time they got down to the baby, the water would be pretty dirty, and that's where the saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," comes from. Now, in between baths, because they weren't able to take those as frequently, they had to find other ways to keep themselves clean. For young girls, they were taught from an early age that it was important to brush their hair, and the saying goes that they would learn to brush their hair 100 strokes on the top and then flip their hair over and do 100 on the back side to evenly distribute some of the oils and dirt around. They also wore sunbonnets to not only help with the sun, but keep some of the dirt off of their hair. Here are two brushes that both have boar's hair and are very effective at distributing some of these oils. In order to wash their face, they generally had some sort of a pitcher and a basin that they would use, and they would pour some water in and use a little bit of soap. Now, we have a couple types of soap here. These first two were actually made near the ranch. They were made with lye, and they have properties that are similar to our soaps nowadays. They might be a little harsher, but overall worked very well. There's also a little bit of Castile soap that we have also picked up that might have been more of a luxury good for them. Here's a natural sponge. Obviously they didn't have the plastic sponges that we have nowadays, and this is actually a sponge that came from the ocean, and they would use this and they could lather it up, get a little soap, and then get all clean that way. Additionally, you're probably wondering how they clean their teeth, and if you look, the toothbrush actually looks pretty similar to the toothbrushes that we have nowadays. The hair is made out of boar's bristles, so it's pretty firm, but it worked quite well. The thing about the toothbrushes is that most families were lucky to have one. So if they did have one, you might be sharing this with your younger brother, your older sister, and everyone in the family. If you didn't have a toothbrush, what you would likely do is take a little bit of this powdered toothpaste, you'd get it wet on your finger, and then you would brush around your teeth. Now let's talk about this powdered toothpaste. The first major ingredient is baking soda, which if you were to look at your toothpaste nowadays, you may actually find that a lot of them still contain baking soda. In addition, there are a couple other ingredients such as anise root, coriander, and myrrh. Some of these they are thought to have been antibacterial properties, and this actually worked quite well in keeping their teeth clean. Here we also have a curling iron. Now this looks a little different than the ones we have nowadays. There's obviously no cord to plug it into the wall. The way that they heated it up was they would put it on the stove, wait until it got nice and hot to the touch, and then they would take their hair and curl it up and get nice little ringlets. Now you can imagine this could get pretty dangerous. If you left it on for too long, you might accidentally burn off your hair. Now this is an interesting container. A lot of women back then would actually store their hair that came out in brushes, and they would use that hair later on for embroidery or to stuff small pillows or different dolls, things like that. And so this is an example of a container that Mrs. Walker might have used to keep some of those hair strands. Now for the men, it was important that if they wanted to shave their beard, they had to find a way to do it, and they didn't have the nice razors that we have nowadays. So they would likely use some sort of a single blade razor. They would sharpen it using this leather strap or something similar to that, and then they would use a brush. This one is actually a badger tail brush, and they would get a little soap, lather it up, put it all over their face, get the blade, and then they would shave. And finally, we have a few other products that women might have used in order to look nice for church or for a big event. Here are a few of the clips or hairpins that they would have used. They look similar to our bobby pins nowadays, and it's a little personalized storage container. And then here is a little bit of rouge that they might have used to put on their cheeks, and it's actually pretty pigmented if you put it on nowadays. Now, something about this back room that you'll notice is there's no toilet. You may wonder how they went to the bathroom, and they have an outhouse that was located near the barn. But in the winter, or if it was late at night, they wouldn't want to walk all the way across there, so they would use the chamber pot instead, and it would likely be one of the younger child's job to empty that out every day and make sure it was clean. Another few interesting things about this back room, you can actually see that there's a little cat hole down here, which is where they expect some cat that likely lived with the family might have come in the night and hung out in here. There's also a cradle right here that shows how maybe the baby, William, might have slept when he was younger, and a rocking chair. Now also, if you come around the door here, you'll notice that the original wallpaper for the house is located behind here. It's the color that is white with a few purple flowers and some blue lines. Something that's really unique about the wallpaper is in order to spice up a room and make it seem less like a log house, they would layer different sheets of wallpaper. So when one started to break away, they would put new up. And you can see some of the later wallpaper that was up here in later years, right here. This is the general tour of the back room. Thank you so much for checking out the log house with us.